Good evening, I'm Jake Ward in for Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Monday, July 11th. Here's a few of the things we're talking about tonight.
Make no mistake. Sit down, you'll hear what I have to say.
We're going to tell you this for years.
Let me finish my comment.
The frustration with President Biden as he struggles to cope with everything from guns to abortion to inflation has a majority of Democratic voters doubting whether he should even run again. Plus, on the eve of another January 6th hearing, we'll recap key revelations from the testimony so far. Then, a question facing Americans after Roe was overturned is whether your phone could be used to prosecute you for seeking an abortion. We'll try and answer that in tonight's feature report. Japanese voters give Shinzo Abe's party a big win in the wake of his assassination. And one of the world's most enormous machines is up and running again in Europe with the hope of providing clues as to how the universe came to be. Good evening. Gun legislation has always been a divisive issue in the U.S. And so today, for President Biden, even modest progress was enough to celebrate. The president praised last month's passage of a bipartisan gun bill, though at one point he admitted that the bill did not go far enough. Manuel Oliver, who lost his son to a mass shooting in Florida, interrupted the president to demand more from him.
You have to do more than that. You have to open an office in the White House. Name a director. Prioritize these problems.
Let him talk. Let him talk.
The president is facing pressure not only to do more on guns, but in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, supporters want action on abortion access as well. And the same is true of the economy and inflation, all of which seems to have left members of his own party doubting his ability to lead. Look at these numbers. A brand new poll by the New York Times and Siena College shows that 64% of Democratic voters do not want Biden to run again in 2024. Plus, among all voters, only 33% approve of the job he's doing. Joining me now is co-founder of Punchbowl News, John Bresnahan. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's think, first of all, just about these poll numbers together. How did you react to them? What do you think they mean?
You know, the poll was a disaster for the president. I mean, there's no way around it. It's, I mean, you look at his approval rating among 18 to 29-year-olds, it's 1% strong approval rating. I mean, he's doing pretty poorly. And, I mean, you look not only at this poll, other polls, their numbers are not quite as bad. They have them in the upper 30s. But listen, this is a very rough patch for President Biden right now. It's very rough. The economy is in a tough position. Their interest rates are rising, yet inflation is high. So it's the worst of all possible circumstances for him. He doesn't seem to have any answers on that. He doesn't have any answers on abortion. The Supreme Court ruling striking down Roe v. Wade. I mean, he just looks right now. He can't do more on guns. They did sign a gun bill. It is the first gun bill in 3 decades, but it's not enough. So I do think there was a lot of promises made to the base, and I think that the president has not been able to deliver on these promises. And I think this is his problem. The base is reacting. The Democratic base, Democratic voters are saying, we're unhappy with Joe Biden.
Well, let me ask you specifically about young voters, right? We have that number that 94% of voters under the age of 30, had those feelings about him. I mean, what do we take away from that? That's such a coveted part of the electorate. If we're looking at 94% of them saying that he should, that somebody else should run. I mean, what do we take away from that? Is this his age? Is that he's not aggressive enough? He's not progressive enough? I mean, what do we think young voters want from the president?
Listen, it's not news that Joe Biden's is the oldest president. We knew how old Joe Biden was when he was elected, so that's not news. I do think look, Biden promised a lot, and I think early in his presidency, he delivered. He delivered the American Rescue Plan. He trotted out this $4 trillion plan that was going to remake American society, the American Jobs Plan, the American Family Plan. And he's tried for the last year and a half to pass it, and he can't. And they promised a lot on guns, and they couldn't deliver on it. They promised on voting rights, they couldn't deliver on it. So I think he's run into the reality of his own party. And of course, the Republican Party is, infinitely hostile to him. Look, I do think younger voters are a big concern because they're energy of the party, but they're not the ones who vote in midterm elections. But I do think even if you get into that number in this poll and across the line, Democrats have a lot to be worried about. I do think, in fairness to the President Biden, if you look at what happened to President Obama in 2010, when unemployment was still high, he was unpopular, and they lost 63 seats, and he recovered. Right now, I do think there is time for Biden to recover, but does he run again? He will be 82 if he runs again. So there was always the thought that maybe Biden is a one-term president. He was a bridge to defeat Trump for a lot of Democrats and then move to the next generation. But where is the next generation of Democrats? I think that's the big issue here.
Yeah, I think about the list of crises that are facing him, right? We're talking about Ukraine, the economy, inflation, guns, abortion. I'm wondering how you think this compares to past presidents, past administrations, and the list of challenges facing them. How hard has circumstance been on President Biden here?
Well, I think it's been very difficult. I think, coming out of the pandemic, which is an unprecedented episode in our lifetime, and a global pandemic that took 1 million lives, the economy is still in an uncertain place. Inflation we've seen reignited in a way that we haven't seen in 4 decades. Part of that was supply chain problems. Part of that is shifting economy just in the United States and globally. The abortion, issue is. I think the problem with a lot of Democrats is they look at Biden, and the problem for a lot of Democrats is they look at Biden, he's a decent man. Everyone knows Joe Biden is a decent guy, but that he looks at the Republican Party and sees Bob Dole, and that Republican Party no longer exists. It's not, George H.W. Bush. It's not Bob Dole. This is a Republican Party that is wildly aggressive. Look at how the Supreme Court came to be the place where it's in now, what Mitch McConnell did with Merrick Garland in 2016. That would have never been done when Biden served. So I do think there's a lot of people who say Biden, is a decent man, a lot of Democrats, but he's, is he the right man? Is the right man for the times? And I think that's his problem. And I'm not sure how you turn that around. But to compare to other presidents, Jimmy Carter faced enormous struggles. Other Democratic president, Barack Obama, faced 10% unemployment. He was very unpopular. He was, it didn't look like he was going to get reelected after the 2010 midterm elections. So I don't think there's panic by the Biden administration or the White House, but they do have lots to be concerned about.
Well, I really appreciate it. John Bresnahan, co-founder of Punchbowl News, taking a hard look at the hard times for President Biden. Thank you so much for making time tonight. Now, it seems like each January 6th hearing has revealed something more spectacular than the one before it. So what can we possibly expect tomorrow? Well, according to the committee, we're slated to hear about the connection between right-wing extremist groups who attacked the Capitol and some of Donald Trump's closest associates, like longtime advisor Roger Stone and former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Both men were at the center of the plot to overturn the 2020 election. Tomorrow's public hearing will be the committee's 7th to date. Now, over a dozen witnesses have shared testimonies so far, each with a new and often disturbing revelation. For instance, former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson claimed that President Trump knew his supporters were armed at the time of the rally and demanded to be taken to the Capitol.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now."
More revelations are likely tomorrow, and in the meantime, NBC News' senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen has a story up right now on NBCnews.com that helps us make sense of all the bombshells we have heard so far. Jonathan, thank you for being with us. Appreciate it.
Sure.
So let's think, first of all, about just, the past, the immediate past, right? We've seen 6 hearings so far, and I'm wondering for you who watches this stuff so closely, what are the revelations that have hit you the hardest?
I mean, I think what is, clear from the committee's outline here is this effort to show that former President Donald Trump used every imaginable avenue to try to overturn the election. And when that didn't work, he urged his supporters to march on the Capitol, where they attacked the Capitol in what is described as an insurrection. In terms of the bombshells that we've heard over the course of the last several weeks, there was a plot to install fake electors in the states that was organized, according to Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel, by a lawyer named John Eastman, who she was introduced to by then President Trump on the telephone. That was a huge revelation. I think, in the most recent testimony, he played some of it from Cassidy Hutchinson. She was told ahead of the January 6th rally that the president was likely to go to the Capitol, that he would be seen as powerful, according to a conversation she said she had with Rudy Giuliani. Beyond that, the president was aware that people were armed in his crowd. She said that he basically said he didn't care and that they weren't there to hurt him. And so those are some of the big revelations. This committee, as you suggested, is still trying to make that connective tissue between what happened in terms of the president's efforts, then president's efforts to overturn the election, and that actual insurrection. And are there people who are talking both either to the president or to his top aides and the insurrectionists?
Well, tomorrow's hearing, as you know, right, will feature Representatives Raskin and Murphy. And Representative Murphy was just recently speaking on Meet the Press and read a tweet. I want to play you a little bit of that. Have a look.
The president's tweet on the wee hours of December 19th of "Be There, Be Wild" was a siren call to these folks. And we'll talk in detail about what that caused them to do, how that caused them to organize.
Representative Murphy is referring there to this tweet. Let's show it to you, in which, in the end, the president says, "Be there, will be wild." And I guess I'm wondering, do you think the committee will be setting out here to connect this as some sort of siren call to the insurrectionists? And how do you think they might do that?
I think that's going to be the effort. I also talked to Congresswoman Murphy within the last few days, and what she said is they're going to try to connect the president's actions to where they merge with the physical violence. So that tweet is certainly one piece of evidence they're going to show, but I think they're going to tell a deeper story, as she suggested, about what transpired after that tweet and how that was taken by some of his supporters, certainly the ones who rushed the Capitol. There is going to be difficulty for them in establishing intent on the part of the president. Of course, this is not a legal proceeding, and so they're not trying him and convicting him, but perhaps providing enough evidence for the Justice Department to take action against him or other people close in his inner circle.
Well, we also know that at this point, Steve Bannon has now said that he will, in fact, come and testify. He'd been basically ignoring his subpoena before now, but it seems to be a little too late. It doesn't seem to have changed the Justice Department's intent to put him on trial. So I guess I'm wondering, why this change of heart on the part of Bannon, and why hasn't it won him goodwill from the Justice Department?
Well, what I've heard from some of our colleagues who have done reporting specifically on this is that, the view of the Justice Department and the judge in this case is basically that Bannon was trying to get rid of his legal problem by agreeing to do something that he had refused to do before. Of course, he was charged with contempt of Congress for a past action, and going to testify before the committee after all that began is not enough to exonerate him without the proceedings. It's also, not clear exactly what he would offer to the committee, or if the committee even needs his testimony at this point.
Right. I mean, it's interesting to hear that the Justice Department, I believe the word they used today was irrelevant, that his agreeing to come before the committee is irrelevant to what's happening now. That never looks good when you see that coming from the Justice Department aimed at you. I wonder, what you think the sort of Steve Bannon, I mean, for you as a reporter who thinks about this stuff, what do you want to hear from Steve Bannon? I mean, the guy only worked in the White House for about 7 months back in 2017. What relevance do you think he has to this?
Well, he was very much in favor of overturning the election results. He's a very influential figure with Trump's base. He hosts a podcast that is, a source of information and a source of speculation and a source of energy for that base. And so, I think what Bannon might be able to speak to is what the mood was at that time and any interactions he may have had either with Trump, who he continued to have contact with directly and indirectly after he left the White House, and other folks who were in touch with Trump.
And what do you think, Jonathan, what else do you think we can expect to hear out of tomorrow's hearing? What else are you going to be looking for?
Yeah, the committee's done a very good job of keeping their their evidence under wraps this time. The last time there was a big impeachment trial. Now, of course, not the post-January 6th impeachment, but the Ukraine impeachment trial. A lot of the information sort of leaked out ahead of time. The committee's been a lot more tight-lipped. This committee has been a lot more tight-lipped. But I do expect to hear a lot about what was going on with these extremist groups. And the committee has said, and there's been testimony supporting it, that these extremist groups really had a sophisticated plan for breaching the Capitol, that this was not some random riot that happened, but rather something that was scoped out and planned out and executed. And I think we're going to hear more about that tomorrow.
Jonathan, we really appreciate it. NBC News' senior national politics reporter, Jonathan Allen, thank you so much for making time tonight.
My pleasure.
Still to come,
good to see you.
If you are, great to see you. Still to come, if you're tracking your menstrual cycle with an app, as so many Americans do you know who else might be watching? What you need to know about data privacy after the fall of Roe versus Wade and in the future. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Millions of people use their smartphones to track personal and sensitive health information. But there's a growing concern that this personal data could be used against them in states where having or even pursuing an abortion is grounds for prosecution. I had a chance to take a look at how one period tracking app was built for this new world.
Steph Black began using period tracking apps in high school.
I'm meticulously tracking what's happening to me in my body.
But when Roe versus Wade came under threat, social media exploded with warnings about them, with women fearing their digital activity could be used against them.
If I lived in a state where abortion was actively being criminalized, I would not use a period tracker.
At least 1,300 women have been investigated, detained, or arrested for their pregnancy outcomes since 2006. And increasingly, phones provide the evidence. Purvi Patel, charged in 2015 with illegally taking abortion pills, had her text messages used in court. Prosecutors used Letice Fisher's web searches for abortion pills to pursue charges against her after a late stillbirth in 2017. The case was later dropped. Now, privacy experts are worried about apps.
People should secure their devices, secure their communications, and secure their browsing history.
Many free apps sell information about their users to data brokers. Some companies are pivoting. The creators of Flow, who settled with the FTC in 2021 for allegedly sharing sensitive health data with marketers, have just announced an anonymous mode. But Steph Black now says she prefers an app called Yuki. It can track periods and sexual encounters and provides information on contraception and abortion without going to a browser. Yuki was originally built by a nonprofit for women in Indonesia, where abortion has long been illegal.
That is even more important now that we're seeing increased restrictions on abortion access in the United States.
Yuki is built for the post-Roe world. Its data never leaves the phone, and it has features to prevent anyone from coercing a user into granting access. One secret command seemingly breaks the app, for instance.
You can just say, oh, the app must be crashing.
And personal data about sexual partners, abortion medications, and doctor's visits can be erased with a tap or on a schedule should the unthinkable happen.
This is very scary. Data to just have on your phone.
You wouldn't trust just anybody with this?
I wouldn't trust anyone with this.
Joining us now is Christopher Slobogan. He's a law professor at Vanderbilt University, and he's the author of a new book called Just Algorithms, Using Science to Reduce Incarceration and Inform a Jurisprudence of Risk. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So let's think, first of all, about the landscape we are now in, the one that you are studying. What is possible for a prosecutor or police to get from us in the age of digital devices and the cloud that they couldn't before those things were invented?
Well, the police are able to accumulate an amazing amount of information about us through a number of different technological techniques. Some of the most common ones that people have probably heard of: GPS tracking, automated license plate reader, facial recognition technology. There's a technology or technique called geofencing, where the police are able to try to locate the perpetrator of a crime by seeing what phones were near the crime at the time and place it occurred. Police can use artificial intelligence to engage in what's called predictive policing. This is a technique designed to develop profiles of people who might soon or are committing crime. And then finally, there's what your last piece referred to, is just data collection generally. Some people have called this the creation of digital dossiers by the government through accumulation of data from a number of different databases.
And I know, based on work that you and others have done in the past, that GPS data, for instance, has not required a warrant in many instances. And I guess I'm wondering, what about period tracking app data? Let's say you're using one of the popular commercial period tracking apps, one that sends information to the cloud. Can a prosecutor get their hands on that sort of thing? I mean, what would it take for that to be entered as evidence in court?
You're right that at one time GPS tracking did not require a warrant, but the Supreme Court has now declared that, at least under certain circumstances, GPS tracking does require a warrant. It's also relatively recently held that getting location data from a third-party common carrier like Verizon requires a warrant. So the Supreme Court is getting in on the act slowly but surely. As usual, it's behind the curve, but at least it's starting to recognize that the Fourth Amendment in the Constitution is relevant here. So as all of this applies to period tracking, I think it's fair to say that if the government wants to get information like that, which is very, very private health information, a good case can be made that it would need at least a subpoena, if not a warrant, which would mean it would need some suspicion already about a woman before it could access any of her information. Now, the problem, though, is that there's some businesses out there, as your piece alluded to, that have as a business model the collection of information that they can then sell to data brokers. And data brokers can then sell that information to the government, and no subpoena or warrant would be required for that, at least under current law. So I think it's a very real concern, and it probably is a good idea, if you want to protect your health information, to use one of these companies that has a very strong privacy policy that refuses to sell to third parties, or one of these apps that does not use a browser at all.
Do you think that the Supreme Court is moving? I mean, you mentioned that they are holding now that something like GPS data may, in fact, require a warrant. Are we moving? You know, it's interesting to me to think about the tension between a court that in some cases seems to be pulling away from the right to privacy, but in other cases is moving toward it. I guess I'm wondering what you think. You know, in the past, there has been really no presumption that information shared with a third party was subjected to, you know, these privacy constraints. I guess I'm wondering, do you think the court is moving in the direction of more and more protecting things like period tracking data, other sorts of data that might be used in these sorts of prosecutions?
I think that would be an accurate prediction. I think, as I said before, the court has been slow to reach this position, but it's starting to realize just what the digital age is bringing us. And I think also, if you were a cynic, you would say it's the court's starting to realize that its own privacy is at risk because of this digital revolution. And so the court is paying much more attention to these privacy issues. And so I think, despite Roe versus Wade, the court would be willing to say that there should be a protection of this kind of health information. But it's going to have to do a lot more to make that clear. The seeds for protection are there, given recent Supreme Court jurisprudence, but the court has yet to make it absolutely clear that this kind of information is protected by the Constitution.
And do you think that we will see that sort of adjudicated state by state? I mean, now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe versus Wade, there's no longer a federal protection for people seeking an abortion in several states. I'm wondering, do you think that's how some of this stuff is going to start getting sorted out? We've seen past prosecutions. You saw there the mention of the 2015 case of Purvi Patel. She was in part prosecuted based on text messages. The case of Latisse Fisher, in part prosecuted on the basis of her web searches. Are we going to see more and more litmus tests like this now that Roe v. Wade has overturned? Do you think that'll be a place where we see a lot of this duked out?
Yeah, as always, litigation begins in the states, in the lower federal courts, and percolates up to the Supreme Court. But I think ultimately the Supreme Court will need to weigh in. And again, my prediction is it will weigh on the side of protection of health information and other very intimate types of information. But you're right, it'll take a while, and the litigation will start at the lowest levels.
When I think about the Fourth Amendment and I think about what it says, right, it protects us as American citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. That's the idea. Our persons, our houses, our papers, our effects. We now live in a world, one constitutional lawyer said it to me, that a phone is essentially a window into our soul. It tells, we tell things to our phones that we would never tell even family members, even our doctors, right? And we've gotten to this new world. So I know that you are, in many ways, trying to simply forecast where this stuff is going, but I wonder how you feel about it. In the world in which we volunteer so much of our personal data into these devices without necessarily realizing where it's going to go, how do you feel about that in the context of a country in which the police are more and more able to access that?
I think the Fourth Amendment needs to be interpreted in a way that provides very robust protection of privacy. The court has defined the word search. You just had the language of the Fourth Amendment up on the screen. The Fourth Amendment uses the word search, and the Supreme Court has defined that word in terms of reasonable expectations of privacy. And some people have argued that if that's the way search is going to be defined, then we have no privacy, because who expects privacy in this day and age, given all the things we've just been talking about, how prevalent our data is, how spread out it is in the cloud, and so on. But there is that all-important word reasonable in front of the phrase expectations of privacy. And the court is starting to interpret the Fourth Amendment and the definition of search to mean that it is reasonable to expect privacy in our intimate information, even if it resides under the control of a third party. At least if that information is intimate, at least if that information can reveal a lot about our daily activities and our personal activities. So I feel strongly that's the way the court should go. I wish it would hurry up a little bit. I wish it would act more in a more expedited fashion.
Certainly, it is dealing with suddenly our most intimate details, ones that we didn't even realize we were turning over. Christopher Slavogan, professor of law at Vanderbilt University, helping us navigate the new frontiers of law and technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we'll get to some... Thank you so much. We'll get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including a search and rescue operation in Ukraine after Russian rockets hit an apartment building. Plus, the results of Japan's elections just days after its former prime minister was assassinated. And the latest in the Elon Musk Twitter saga. He says he's not buying it, but a legal battle might force the deal through. Today caps a bloody weekend in Ukraine. At least 33 people were killed after a Russian missile hit an apartment building in the eastern part of the country. Roughly a dozen people remain trapped underneath the rubble. Russia, however, denies targeting civilians. Earlier today, NBC's Ali Arouzi caught up with the head of the emergency services of the Donetsk region. Here's some of what he had to say.
What problems are you meeting in your rescue operations right now? What's holding it up? What do you need? What's making it difficult?
There is only one obstacle we are facing now. It's the shelling in the area where our workers are conducting the rescue operation. We have enough means and forces to continue a 24-hour operation properly, but our workers are working under permanent threat to their lives because of constant attacks.
Japan, meanwhile, is reeling from a shocking assassination and a blow to their collective sense of safety. But the country had an election over the weekend, and former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's party won big just 2 days after he was murdered. The Liberal Democratic Party and its junior coalition partner secured more than half the seats of the parliament's upper chamber. This boosts Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's standing. He now has 3 years in power without a national election. That's something his government is calling his golden years. The current prime minister said he plans to build on Shinzo Abe's legacy. Abe was shot with a homemade gun last Friday during a campaign stop. It's a shocking event, especially since Japan has banned almost all gun ownership since 1958. Mourners continue to pay their respects to the former prime minister, including U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
I shared with our Japanese colleagues the sense of loss, the sense of shock that we all feel, the American people feel, at this horrific tragedy and killing. We saw in him something rare, a man of vision who's had the ability to realize that vision. But mostly, I came at the president's behest because more than allies, we're friends. And when a friend is hurting, other friends show up.
Twitter won't be letting Elon Musk walk away without a fight. On Friday, Elon Musk filed a document to try and cancel his $44 billion bid to take over Twitter. Yesterday, according to Bloomberg, Twitter lawyered up. Twitter will retain the services of a high-powered merger law firm whose lawyers have close ties to the court where the case will be heard. Musk, meanwhile, has hired his own high-powered firm, which successfully defended him against a defamation claim in 2019. Neither firm has yet to comment. But Musk did react today on Twitter to the news that Twitter was planning to sue him, posting this meme of himself. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is resigning from the top job in British politics, and members of his party are jockeying for his place. This comes after members of his administration stepped down in protest. But the race to find his successor could take some time. Here's Sky News correspondent Amanda Acast.
The crowded field of Conservative MPs jostling to replace Boris Johnson, with 2 more candidates entering the fray late last night. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is popular with Tory party members and has long been seen as a potential frontrunner. Like some of her rivals, she's pledging to reverse the controversial hike in national insurance introduced in April. Writing in The Telegraph, she says, "Under my leadership, I would start cutting taxes from day one to take immediate action to help people deal with the cost of living." Newly appointed Foreign Office Minister Raymond Chishti is the latest to throw his hat into the ring and the biggest outsider.
So for me, it's about aspirational conservatism, it's about fresh ideas, and then it comes down to having a fresh team with enthusiasm and a mindset for collaboration, innovation and partnership as we move forward.
The battle lines are clearly being drawn around the issue of tax, with nearly all the candidates pledging to make cuts.
Tax cut. Tax cut. Tax cuts. That is a tax which will not go up.
The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, however, continues to resist the idea of cutting taxes in a time of rising prices, warning against telling voters comforting fairy tales. Experts say there needs to be clarity on how tax cuts could impact government spending.
It is quite something to be focusing on the tax cuts rather than potential spending increases, and I guess that's a very strong political message that's coming out of this leadership election.
Today, the focus shifts to the 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers. They're set to hammer out the rules for the contest amid calls from within the party to ensure only candidates with solid support can get on to the ballot paper. MPs will then whittle down the contenders to a final 2, with the Tory party membership ultimately deciding on the next leader of the party and the country. Amanda Acast, Sky News.
Before the end of the month, Sri Lanka will have a new president. The country's current president is set to resign this week, along with his entire cabinet. The move comes after weeks of outrage over the country's economic crisis reached a boiling point. Over the weekend, thousands of protesters stormed the presidential residence. The country has been hit hard by one of the worst financial crises in its history. A government minister announcing today Parliament will elect a new president on July 20th. Now, this was all a long time coming. The island nation's financial woes have led to a massive fuel, food, and medicine shortage. Sri Lanka is also in danger of defaulting on its foreign debts and faces skyrocketing inflation. Many blame President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his family for contributing to the nation's financial crisis. The Rajapaksas have dominated Sri Lankan politics for nearly 20 years. And now that you know what has happened in Sri Lanka, tomorrow we'll be digging deeper into why this is happening, and we need your questions to do that. Please leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail at 888-575-2NBC or email us at nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Coming up, the world's highest insulin prices are right here in the United States. California, however, wants to change that. We'll break down the state's $100 million plan to make insulin affordable. Over the past decade, the price of insulin has skyrocketed. It's not uncommon for Americans to pay $300 to $500 a month out of pocket for this life-saving drug. The state of California now announcing it wants to take matters into its own hands. Here's how Governor Gavin Newsom broke it down.
The budget I just signed sets aside $100 million so that we can contract to make our own insulin at a cheaper price, close to at cost, and to make it available to all. $50 million will go towards the development of low-cost insulin products, and an additional $50 million will go towards a California-based insulin manufacturing facility that will provide new, high-paying jobs and a stronger supply chain for the drug. Because in California, we know people should not go into debt to receive life-saving medication.
Joining us now is Anthony DeFranco. He's the co-founder of Open Insulin, a nonprofit aimed at helping communities have access to safe, affordable, high-quality insulin. Anthony, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you, first of all, according to a study published about 3 years ago, roughly 1 in 4 people suffering from diabetes are forced in some cases to ration or skip doses. This is a drug that literally means the difference between life and death. How did we arrive at this place?
Yeah, well, that is something that I'm familiar with myself as a type 1 diabetic. Just going to the more systemic issues that are implicated here. First of all, there are only 3 manufacturers that control around 95% of the global market for insulin. So just at the level of the diversity of sources in the supply, there's a major issue, and that operates worldwide. Coming to the U.S., there are some additional issues which have been getting more and more attention recently, which is that the supply chain for medicine in general, but this is of concern in insulin as well, is very complex, and sitting in between the manufacturers and the pharmacies, there are other middlemen, insurance companies and pharmacy benefits managers, and they have agreements among themselves to have exclusive supplies and to have complex systems of rebates and so on that really restrict the supply and subvert the market forces that might otherwise operate to actually have this be as affordable as it can be, looking at the fundamental economics of production.
Well, let me ask you about production here, right? Because as I understand it, Open Insulin, your organization, has essentially come up with ways to home brew insulin for people who cannot otherwise afford it. I guess I'm wondering, how hard is it to make? Because you seem to know this intimately. And what has making it yourself taught you about how much we're asked to pay in the open market for it?
Yeah, well, so some sort of a home-based production is a longer-term goal that we're not immediately working on. But what we're looking at right now, which is the kind of next best thing and something that already makes a lot of economic sense, is to take techniques that are already used for small-scale contract production that is used to make medicine at a small scale for purposes like clinical trials and academic research, and to use those established production techniques to create an open source technology base for duplicating that, and to organize production on a local scale that is owned and managed by the people using the medicine. so that we will.
And in light of that,
really
let me ask you,
have
Anthony, in light of that, in light of just how simple, not simple, but obviously, you know, your ambition to create a home-based technological platform, I mean, does it seem strange to you that therefore there are only 3 manufacturers and that it does cost people $300 to $500 a month out of pocket? Does that seem perverse to you in a world in which you seem to be pursuing the idea that somebody could one day make it at home?
Clearly, it doesn't make any sense from the perspective of just looking at the fundamental economic and technical considerations. To answer your previous question, what we found is that based on our preliminary estimates, we could produce insulin at a price of about $7 a vial, which is far lower than even an insurance copay. And we found that a production facility that could serve several hundred thousand to perhaps a few million people could be set up for $10 to $20 million. So really, there's no technical or economic justification for this.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, on Friday, Governor DeSantis of Florida signed something that basically said that prescription prices have to become lower for Floridians. And I wonder, with California and Florida sort of wading in here, right, shaping the market outright, do you think this represents a sea change? Are you hopeful about the direction things are going?
Yeah, I certainly am hopeful. In the first few years that we were working on this, we faced a lot of skepticism, and it's reassuring to see a consensus building that is bipartisan and that is growing up in many states and is developing among both legislators and regulators and other interested parties to do some sensible things about this. And to speak to the executive order that you mentioned, one of the provisions in there is meant to create some transparency around these opaque economic arrangements that I mentioned in the supply chain previously that are a big factor in this problem in the U.S. So I'm hopeful to see this, these first few steps being taken down this long road that we are all trying to go down to just make this as ubiquitous as it needs to be.
Anthony DeFranco, co-founder of Open Insulin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Scientists deep beneath the Alps are simulating conditions at the beginning of the universe. Their tool, well, it's a 17-mile-long particle accelerator in Switzerland. It's an incredible machine, and it just made 3 new discoveries. We'll tell you about the latest exotic developments within the Large Hadron Collider next. Right now, beneath the Alps, near the city of Geneva, Switzerland, there is a tunnel. And machinery inside that tunnel sends beams of energy in a vast circle, so big it would take you nearly 6 hours to walk around it just once. And then it crashes them into one another. That machine is the Large Hadron Collider. It's the world's biggest and most powerful particle accelerator, a multi-billion-dollar instrument. And here's the thing, it freaks people out. If you begin to type the words Large Hadron Collider into Google right now, one of the Google searches that'll come out asks whether it can destroy the world. Well, it hasn't done that. That would have been our top story. But as of this week, it has discovered 3 new particles which could help us learn how our universe was born and what its future looks like. Let's bring in Dr. Sarah Demers to help break this down. Dr. Demers is a professor of physics at Yale University. Dr. Demers, thank you so much for being here.
I'm very happy to be here.
So let's start with the layman's terms here. Explain to me as simply as you can, what is the Large Hadron Collider and what does it do?
It is our largest collider in the world. Some people describe it as the world's biggest freezer. It's also the world's biggest vacuum chamber, so it has lots of superlatives. But the goal is to get fundamental particles moving as fast as we possibly can, very, very close to the speed of light, and then we smash them together. You can think about this a little bit like a time machine. We're going back to the conditions that were very soon after the Big Bang, and by doing this, we're able to explore the fundamental particles in the makeup of the universe and the way those particles interact with each other. So the goal really is fundamental science. How does it work?
And this, I assume, is why this thing costs so many billions of dollars and has brought together scientists from all over the world. You've essentially created a simulation of the early days of the universe here on Earth, and everybody can draw on it from together. Am I right about that?
That's right. And it takes all of us. It takes the entire world community to come together in order to make this happen. And actually thousands of us to keep it running and make sense of the data from it.
And as I understand it, you have now bumped up into, or I don't know quite what the verb is to use here, right? But you have discovered exotic new particles. Tell me about that. What does that mean?
It means that we understand quite a bit about the matter that we can see around us. People are familiar maybe with the atoms. You learn about the structure of the atoms. But it's possible when we have access to even higher energies to create particles that aren't around typically in nature. We have to create them in our high energy collisions. And those are the kinds of particles that were only around very early in the universe when there was that much energy density and energy available. So we're able to study those exotic particles that otherwise we wouldn't have access to. And it's surprising how much those kinds of particles can actually teach us about the universe as a whole.
Well, connect that for me, right? When we think about trying to, there's what you and I can observe with our eyes and our ears, measure in the ways that, I might think of as the conventional ways to measure things, but you are simulating early conditions that we have never really been able to watch in any real sense before now. So what are the implications of being able to see these particles for the first time? What are you going to do with that information?
Well, we have a lot of questions. There's quite a bit that we've learned about the fundamental particles in the universe, but it seems that every time we learn something, there are more questions that come along with it. So I think by creating these exotic particles and this matter, we're trying to learn how did we end up with the universe that we have now, and what can we expect in terms of the way the universe will behave in the future. We have big gaps in terms of our understanding. When we look actually at the entire mass energy content of the universe, it's only about 4% that we can claim to have a solid understanding of within our models. So we have really big questions that we're trying to answer through these kinds of investigations.
A physicist once said to me that essentially our understanding of the universe is mostly built on these sort of theoretical ideas that we've created this kind of rickety structure and then put a bunch of science up on top of it, and now we're trying to fill it in underneath. It feels to me like you are in some way, thanks to the Large Hadron Collider, able to click in some of these sort of structures underneath all of what has been theoretical understanding before now.
That's absolutely true, and that's a piece of the fun. But even more fun is the fact that the structure that we've built, this theoretical model of the universe, we know is incomplete. We know that there are problems with it. So I wouldn't say we're trying to prop it up. I would say we're trying to find the gaps and probe those pieces that don't seem to make sense to us so that we can build up a better structure and a better model of how the universe works.
And give us the long-term objective here. Let's say you really get to a place where you feel like you understand the history of the universe in this way, really understand the fundamental particles, and get to a complete picture of things. What will that make possible for us that we, don't currently have available to us?
Wow, it's hard to even imagine. I feel so far from that point, it's hard to even imagine standing at that point where I understand the fundamental makeup of the universe. But I think getting to that point would be just a huge achievement for us as human beings, understanding that aspect of how the world around us works. It would give us a tremendous amount of information about our future. We look out at the universe now and we see that it's expanding at an accelerating rate. We don't understand why that is. We don't really understand what the evolution of that has been or what will be. So it would give us a sense of where we're headed in terms of the universe. It's interesting to think about practical applications of this kind of work. And those kinds of things are hard to predict. Because in the history of the field, when we first discovered the electron, for example, that was almost at the level of a magic trick in terms of trying to understand a new phenomenon that wasn't grasped earlier. So it's not really simple to talk about practical implications because I don't think we know them. We do know that in doing this work, we're moving forward a lot of understanding and pushing computing and different technologies to enable us to do our experiments. So in that way, we're moving forward all kinds of frontiers of knowledge.
Well, it's really extraordinary to imagine you all deep underneath the Swiss Alps, simulating the earliest days of the universe, putting particles together the way that really only the universe was able to before now. So extraordinary work you are doing. Dr. Cyril Demers joining us from Switzerland tonight. Thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
And I'm Jake Ward in for Joshua Johnson. Thanks for being with us. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.